being here. There's a lot of you here that I don't know, which is very exciting. My name is Bree. I run the adult programs here at the library, so organizing things like having Paul come speak for us. Next Tuesday, we have a performance by a local historical reenactor who's doing a program on Eleanor Roosevelt. If you're interested in that, we still have seats available. We do a lot of craft programs here. We have 4 book clubs, so look at our website or talk to me after, and we'll find some other fun stuff for you to do. Thank you to Medfield TV for being here. This is great. If you want to see this program again, it will be on Medfield TV, and I'll get that information to you via email. There we go. So that you can watch it again or tell your friends how to watch it. And without further ado, here's Paul Clerici, who's going to tell you all about himself and the Boston Marathon.
Thanks, Bree. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. I'm Paul Clerici. I'm in Walpole, so I'm nearby. I've run the Boston Marathon 23 times and 20 other marathons. I've also covered the race since the late 80s. So between running it and covering it for newspapers, magazines, and the books that I've written, decided to talk on the actual race itself, history, anecdotes, some fun tales. If anyone has any questions while I'm talking, just raise your hand. You don't have to wait to the end. Sometimes I do that, I'll forget what the question is. So just feel free to ask. And I do have books here for sale that if you buy today, I can sign them for you for a good gift for anybody. You know, the marathon is just around the corner. But again, I'll take you through the course. Neat little anecdotes. Those are the 2 covers of the 2 of my books. But in 1896, for the Modern Olympic Games, the Boston Athletic Association, the BAA, which organizes the Boston Marathon, part of our U.S. Olympic team were members from the BAA. And we went to the 1896 Modern Olympic Games in Greece. And one of the events was the marathon, which at the time was 25 miles or so. It wasn't 26.2 yet. And the BAA did really well with some gold medals. They loved the idea of the marathon. And when they came back to Boston after the games, they wanted to incorporate that in their own events. They had what was called the BAA Games. Behind where the Boston Public Library is now, there used to be a track on Irvington Street, which is no longer there. And they would have their games there, so they figured, let's have the marathon end there. So now we have to find a start, 25 miles from Boston. Well, they couldn't go east, in the water. Didn't really want to go to New Hampshire or Rhode Island, so what they did is they followed the train to west, and it just ended up in Ashland. This is a mural that's in Ashland right now. Pleasant Street is this road right here. Here's the Sudbury River. This is the Metcalfe's Mill. They made cardboard boxes for shoes. It burned down in the 30s, but that's what it was. So for 1897, the year after the Olympic Marathon, Boston held their first marathon. And here's the starting line. 18 men signed up, 15 showed up, 10 finished. I don't know where the other 5 went, but they all lined up here. So in 1897, the first race for the Boston Marathon was here. And you can actually go here in Ashland right now. They're setting up different things over the years, like tourist things, information. This is the actual road. It's configured a little different, but this is Pleasant Street. There's a Sudbury River. This is where the Metcalfe's Mill used to be in the previous photo. But they've made this area called Marathon Park. And they have little walkways, benches, little monuments. There's some plaques that tell you the first 27 years of the marathon started in Ashland before it moved to Hopkinton. So those 27 years of history is in these little plaques all along the sidewalks. And occasionally Ashland will have a race on the actual starting line. There's Bill Rogers right there in the black, the year that I took this photo. And lined up right here on the starting line, if you go all the way near the tracks, is a photo in my book that has, there's like a little monument, little stone. It says 25B, meaning 25 miles to Boston. They're not sure when that was put in, but that's like a nice little marker because the commuter rail still goes there. So it's the same tracks, same line. So 1897, 1898, this is where the Boston Marathon started, the first 2 years. And then it finished on Exeter Street, again, sort of behind where the Boston Public Library currently is in Boston. And then finally, the BAA built their clubhouse on Exeter Street. So they wanted the marathon to finish in front of the clubhouse, obviously. So they had to adjust the finish and the start. So the finish was in front of the clubhouse, and the start was moved back here. There's a little hill that goes over the railroad tracks on High Street. So the first 2 years it was here. The next 7 or 8 years was right about here. You can actually see the beginning of the street on High Street. Still there now. And it started there. Ashland gave me a great photo to use. You see about 30 or 40 runners in the dirt and rainy day on the bridge. It's a really great old photo. And then after a while, there was so many runners. There's 31,000 now, but there were so many runners on the bridge, like 50 or 60. They're like, the bridge can't support us. We have to move the start. So for the next dozen or so years, the last time it started in Ashland was on Route 135. There was a farm there, the current 4-kilometer mark. So runners who actually run the race now, and they go over the 4-kilometer mark, that was the last time it started in Ashland. It started there for about a dozen or so years until it moved to Hopkinton. So there's 3 different starts in Ashland, all within the same area. This is about maybe a mile from the actual course, like a crow's flight. It's on the other side of the Amtrak commuter rail if you ever want to visit it. It's a great area too. Also in Boston, it being cold today, on Patriots Day, we get a great amount of weather. This is 2018. I took this picture in Framingham, about 6 miles in. It was like a cold, windswept rain on Patriots Day in April. Boston's marathons also had snow. It's had an eclipse. It's had real tough winds. It's had everything. It's New England in April. I'm not too sure what season it is in April. This was tough because there was a real strong headwind. You can see how red their legs are. And they've only run 6 miles. They have 20 to go. It was really tough in 2018. I ran from 1990 to 2012, and I hit a couple of storms. Wasn't this cold, but we had like hurricane storms, the edge of hurricanes. It can be tough in April, as we know. Even snow, which isn't too much fun. This is in Natick in 2012 when it reached 80s and 90s. When I ran this in 2012, when I got to Wellesley, there's a bank, they had the time temperature and it said 91 degrees. And I'm like, I really didn't need to know that. But the Natick Fire Department here, they always put the hoses, if it's a hot day, spectators put hoses, to hose down runners. This particular year, 2012, where they had, when it was really hot, they put their hazmat little tunnel here that when the firefighters, wash off the uniforms after a fire, they roll that out for us, and there's this little showers that come from the ceiling and everything, so you can walk through it, this little tunnel of showers. And I remember taking these pictures for one of the books I was writing around that time, and it was 90s, so I was walking a lot anyway. So I took this picture, but I noticed nobody was like walking by me enough that I was seeing through my camera. So I lowered the camera to look, and what runners would do is, because it was so hot, they'd go in and out like 3 times. Because they'd come through and you'd just be hot, and it would just dry you off. So you come through the tunnel, the spray would get on you, and then they hook around and they come through like little circles. It was that bad. You can just tell how you can get wiped out. The year I took this, you can see how low the ceiling is, how dense the fog was. Also, a little side note about this is, I forget the year of this photo, that the TV coverage suffers because the satellite goes from the TV station, bounces off a helicopter down to the cameras. Well, with a low ceiling like this, the helicopter couldn't fly. So all the coverage for this year and any other year that this happens is if like Channel 4 or Channel 5 now, but whatever station's covering it, if they have people along the course with their video cameras, that's what you saw for the coverage until the helicopters were able to go up. But the ceiling was so low, you can see how thick it is. This is the high school at the Athletes Village. The runners, we didn't really care. Unless it's like really muggy and warm, it can kind of hover the heat and really bad feeling that way. But for the most part, if it's nice and cool, this can kind of keep you cool, especially it being a real dense fog. But this is what the village looks like on a normal day, nice and bright. This is the back of the Hopkinton High School, Middle School. 1996 for the 100th Boston Marathon, there were 38,000 runners. So to accommodate that, they created this Athletes Village, which is still being used today. Everyone comes here several hours before. You can just relax. The Porta-Johns is a stage here, somewhere, a stage over there that you can do calisthenics. It just gets you can relax, fall asleep. For the 96, again for the 100th, it snowed a day or two before Boston. I don't know if anybody remembers that. So all this field was covered in snow. So Dave McIlvery, the race director, had to figure something out quickly. So what he did was he had a couple of Army helicopters hover about 100 feet above the ground. to sort of like a big drying up the grass, which actually worked. But I always joked with them. I said, did you tell the residents that you're gonna have a couple of Army helicopters? Living here, I'm sure you hear it as well. Me in Walpole, because of Norwood, I hear helicopters fly all the time. They're very high up and you can still hear it. Can you imagine 100 feet up? It's only 10 stories right above it. But it worked. He put like sawdust and some dirt and some hay, and it wasn't too bad for us. A little muddy, obviously, but all the people running really wasn't that bad. Now this is Hopkinton, where it all starts, since 1924. These white buildings are Hayden Rose Street, and they come right out here, and then Main Street is right here. So when you see the marathon now, the marathoners start on Main Street, which is right in front of this common here area. But from 1965 to 1985, all those Bill Rogers and Joan Benoit Samuelson, wheelchair champion Bob Hall, all those people started on Hayden Row. So from 1965 to 85, you started on this street, the gun went off, you ran really fast and then had to take a right-hand turn. Now you just go straight. But can you imagine the beginning of a marathon, you're halfway down the street, or a quarter of the way down, and then you have to go take a nice turn. And this gentleman here, this is 2005, 2006 or so, is actually Frank Shorter, who won the US Olympic Marathon in 1972, gold medal, won the silver medal in 76, basically started the running boom. That was on TV. He was mic'd up for Channel 5, I think. So he was gonna run the course and give reports as he's running. And he's just relaxing. No one's even paying attention to him. He's one of our greatest marathoners. I remember showing him this picture a little bit later at the Falmouth Road Race. He was with Catherine DeRaber, who'd won Boston 4 times, Bill Rogers. He was with some of the other runners. And I showed him this photo, and he's all excited. He's showing, go, look, I'm actually lying down. I'm doing what you're supposed to do. Did I tell people? And they're looking at Frank like, yeah, you're an Olympic medalist, of course. No, but look, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. It was just kind of funny. He became like a normal runner at that point. Because, before a race, you lie down, keep your legs up, you sort of relax, and he's actually doing it. Practice what you preach, right? This is to the left of where the photo of Frank was. This is Ash Street right here. And behind me is Main Street, to kind of give you an idea. So the Common is right in the middle, right to the right of this. You have the starter statue, with George V. Brown with the starter's pistol. The Brown family has been involved in the Boston Marathon, the Boston Arena, the Celtics for decades. Other than 1 year in the Boston Marathon history, there's been a Brown family member who has started the race. You'll always see one of the Brown families starting one of the races. So there's a statue of him, and he's actually facing the starting line. So the starting line is a little bit over here. He's actually lined up with the starting line, which is nice. Marathon Way is a little portion, a little triangle of area in front between the starting line and the Common that you see on TV where the staging is. That's called Marathon Way, a little section in front here. This is the BAA headquarters on 1 Ash Street, the first building on Ash Street if you go to Hopkinton to look at some of these sites. And right here, if you see the little outline of this is a yellow unicorn in the window. And each day, as it gets closer to the marathon, the unicorn gets closer and closer to the middle of the window until marathon morning, the whole window's filled with that unicorn. And it just like magically appears. I don't know if for the rest of the year it like disappears and goes around the house. I don't know. But that's where you'll see it. And down Ash Street, about a block or two in front of the old school, is the Team Hoyt statue that you've probably seen on TV. Rick and Dick Hoyt, the statue is dedicated to them. The reason it's down there is that the wheelchair athletes line up on Ash Street in order, kind of like in a C, like a grid, based on the fastest athletes in front, and the Hoyts would be behind them. So they would line up down on Ash Street, kind of in front of that school, and then a little bit before they would have to start, they would be escorted up to the starting line in that grid, so they would start in the same order. So that's why they have the statue down there, because that's where the Hoyts will always be with the wheelchair athletes. It's a great statue, it's a beautiful statue to see. The actual starting line is interesting. Jack LeDuc would painted it for decades. He no longer paints it, his family does, and some other volunteers do. Every year it's different, it's like a surprise. They still do this. They do something on the starting line to reflect the year. For example, the first year, they had wave starts. For decades, the Boston Marathon would start at noon. Gun went off, man, woman, child, you went at noon. And then in the mid-2000s, they changed it to around 10:30 or so, 10 or 10:30. There's 10 different starts now. But what they did it in waves. So every few minutes, you would have about 9,000 runners go, like the top 9,000 runners. And then a couple of minutes later, you'd have the next 9,000. So there'd be waves of starts, which was sort of spread out the field, which worked out really well. So for that year, he painted waves on the starting line. If it was somebody's anniversary, he would paint that. The year Johnny the Elder Kelly died, the two-time winner, they put a nice little silhouette of him. This year here, if you notice here, it says BM47 DM. Dave McGilvey always runs the Boston Marathon after everyone else. So if you ever see on TV, Dave McGilvey being the race director, he makes sure everything went off okay. He's the one in the little motorcycle before the race. You always see him organizing the starts and everything. He's everywhere. But once the race gets going, around 2:30 in the afternoon, he'll go back to Hopkinton. First, to make sure everything's okay. He'll go back to Hopkinton with a couple of state troopers. He has a walkie-talkie, so he's still connected. And he'll run the marathon. He usually finishes, depending when he starts, maybe 10 or 11 at night. He gets on news all the time. If you see him on channel 4 and 5, which is great. But for this year, this was his 47th year of the year I took the photo, DM47. And these little white lines here, this is actually his cardiogram and a little red heart because he had open heart surgery the year before. So to honor him for surviving that and coming back to run marathons, they put his little cardiogram there. So I thought that was kind of neat. He got a kick out of that. But yeah, you'll see. So if you ever watch it on TV, they never tell you ahead of time what it's going to be. It's always something different, which is neat. Like I said, in the old days at noon, it was just everybody. We filled curb to curb. That was it. And at 12 o'clock, the gun went off. We all just took off. And however long it took, if you're back here, this is the 24th corral. So about 24,000, 25,000. Each corral has about 1,000 runners. If it took you 10 minutes, if by 12:09 or 12:10 is when you actually cross the starting line, doesn't matter. That's how long, you're 10 minutes into your time. This is before any of those chips that you see on the bib numbers. In 1996, for the 100th, was the first year ever what was called the championship. It was like a little plastic disc that you put on your shoelaces. And they had a mat at the start, periodically across the course, and at the finish line with wires underneath. So when a runner ran over that, it recorded you through your chip. So if it took you 10 minutes to get from here to the starting line, your time didn't start until you crossed the starting line. Now there's a little metal strip on your bib number, and it's the same principle. You can actually track your runner, your friend, on your phone, because every 5 kilometers there's one of those mats along the course that when you run over it, it records you. So it's much better. But before that, we just filled everybody at noon. We just went off. Now what happened was a natural bottleneck would form. If you ever watched this on TV back in the old days, you have all these runners, from curb to curb, but then when you get to the starting line, it was thinner. And you'd have to stand and wait. So Dave McGilvey was charged with fixing that. So what he did was he measured the width of Main Street. And the widest part was 85 feet, I believe, somewhere around here. And the most narrow was 39 feet, the starting line, which there's your bottleneck. So what he did was he measured 25 feet of a width and put police fencing. So when you watch it on TV now, you'll see the police fencing and a little space between the fencing and the curb. That's where they put like a water station and volunteers. But it's a uniform 24 feet width all the way down. And I remember the first year he did that, one of the years I was running it, and I'm thinking, well, if you're doing that, aren't you squeezing us farther back? Won't I be farther back? I'm thinking, so it's gonna take me longer. So the gun went off and you just went right through. Because there was a uniform 25 feet width, didn't take long at all. He knew what he was doing, obviously. And we just went right through. So you're no longer from curb to curb, but I like the photo. I just like the way that fills in all the colors and everything. The 1 mile mark, still in Hopkinton, has this statue. The real long story how that, I'll make it very brief, but there's an identical one in Greece. In 2004, to mark the Olympics returning to Athens in Greece, they wanted to have a statue. Stylianos Kyriakidis, this gentleman here from Greece, won Boston in 1946. And he was befriended by Johnny Kelly. If you remember in 1946, after the war, Greece was like decimated. So Stylianos used this opportunity to tell the world, you know, Greece, we need food, we need supplies. Basically, being the first charity runner, he basically was responsible for literally shiploads of supplies back to Greece because of his exposure in the newspapers talking about it, because Greece was just decimated. So they wanted to have a statue for him. His son Dimitri organized this, and the gentleman out of Tewkesbury created that statue. So he said, well, let's have one, an identical one in Marathon, where the marathon starts, in Marathon, Greece. So the mayor said, okay, that'd be great, thanks. I think the mayor changed, or the attitude changed, and then as the artist was creating it, he said, no, we don't want it. So Dimitri goes, well, let me go to Athens, where the finish is. And he goes, yeah, the mayor goes, great, yeah, we'll have that there, but can you add Spiridon Louis, who was the Greek marathoner who won the 1896 Modern Olympic Marathon. So the artist is like, well, it's not really like a painting. I can't just like paint another guy. I'm creating a sculpture, but I'll think about it. So what he did was, because he created Stylianos Kyriakidis right here. The plains of Marathon is this rocky area. Phidippides is on one side, the god Pan is on the other. Really beautiful statue. And then he created another body of Spiridon Louis, and he kind of attached them to the side. And if you notice, Spiridon Louis' feet don't touch the ground. And that's how they named it the Spirit of the Marathon statue, in that Stylianos Kyriakidis was running with the spirit of Spiridon Louis. And he kind of just like attached it. So they agreed, okay, we'll do that. And there's an identical one like this in Greece. So it's in time for the 2004 Olympics, barely.
Is that one at Western Nurseries now?
Yeah, the Western Nurseries. Thank you for mentioning that. The location is actually the Western Nursery over here, where they have some great trees and bushes and everything. And you can see it, they made like a nice little plaza here. Although the runners barely look at it because they're a mile into it and they're all psyched up to run. But it's really worth seeing. It's there all the time. It's just a beautiful statue. There's a lot more to it politically and everything that Dimitri told me, because I did a story about it. But that's the gist of it. In Ashland here, when you enter Ashland, I put this in because it's interesting. You always tell runners don't start out fast, you know, with a marathon. You can see how downhill this is. I mean, because you've changed your life for months or a year, you know. You forgot to pick up your Johnny from school, you've changed your diet, you've annoyed your family, whatever it is, for a year. The gun goes off, you're ready to go. You want to run really fast. But you really shouldn't, because it's downhill. You don't want to waste energy. But also safety-wise, too. In 1987, 88, late 80s, in the same marathon, a couple of things happened that changed how they organized a little bit. Again, at noon, one-time start, but the wheelchair athletes went off about 5 or 10 minutes earlier. And this year, in late 80s, the wheelchairs were those more vertical hospital chairs that they competed in, not those real nice aerodynamic ones. Well, that week, the city had repaved this section here, and it was a little misty that morning, so it was a little slick. So the wheelchair athletes went off, and they started to slide, because it's downhill. And they crashed into each other, they fell off on the grass, and they fell. They're athletes, so they didn't care. They just picked themselves up, but it didn't look good, if you remember the pictures of it. So 5, 10 minutes later, the runners were going to start. Now, back then, they had a volunteer at one side, each side on the curb, holding a rope across the chest of the front runners. And what they would do is have a countdown, they'd drop the rope, and they would just, you know, take their rope off. Well, that same race, they were a little slow with the rope, gun went off, and a lot of runners tripped over the rope. Same race. So Dave McGilvery's like, okay, let me think about this, because he was asked to fix that. So what he did for the wheelchair athletes is he had a vehicle in front of the wheelchair athletes, the gun went off for them, they would pace the wheelchair athletes down to somewhere around here where it starts to level off and there's a line painted. Once they crossed that line, then they could race. So they were controlled start going down. That seemed to work for decades. And then after a while, the wheelchair athletes said, you know, we're better athletes, we're in better shape, the wheelchairs are a little better aerodynamic, you don't really need to do that anymore. And they don't do that anymore. Past couple of years, they stopped doing that. But it bridged that area to do that so it was more safe. And then for the runners, and he still does this, you'll see this on TV, instead of having a rope, Dave McGilvey has about 20 or 30 volunteers shoulder to shoulder. You ever see that on TV? Facing the runners, so like they're the rope now. And then when the countdown is, the volunteers separate and go on the curb. So now there's nothing in the middle, gun goes off, and they take off. So he did solve those two problems, which is great because Dave McGilvey is a runner and an organizer, manager. he combines both of those thought processes, which is great to organize an event like this or solve problems. So someone like him is perfect. Entering Framingham, the roads get real wide. This is 8 kilometers, about 5 miles. You'll start to see on TV, the runners starting to get their groove, because the first few miles is kind of clustered together. This also being Framingham, the train tracks is right here, the commuter rail, which is great because they'll beep and support you. It's nice hearing the train noise because the train parallels the course for several miles, so it's nice to hear them. What's interesting here is that the set license tracks, the Amtrak goes right here, so you got to watch your step on the tracks that cut right across. But back in the 30s, Thomas Longboat, for this particular year, and about 5 other runners were running in the lead, and they kept hearing the train getting louder and louder and louder with the horn. And they kept looking at it and realizing it's not stopping. So about 5 or 6 runners who were in the lead really ran fast to get on the other side, just in time that the train cut across the course. Everyone else had to wait. They're just sitting there going, oh, okay, great. So those other 5 or 6 runners just kept going like, thank you. And for about a minute, the train just kept going, cutting across. And then everyone else had to wait for the train, and they kept going. And obviously, the winner came from that first group. Hasn't happened since. I always joke with Dave McGilvery, make sure he has a train schedule. He goes, no, it will not happen. Especially during the Boston Marathon. But it had happened back in the 30s. Now, entering Natick, I always like this because it's kind of like a New England thing, where one town does their paving or their shoulder work, and then they stop. And the other towns never run the same schedule, So here, Framingham's like, we're just going to do up to here. Our shoulder's going to be out to here. You're on your own. Natick, good luck. But it also shows this little incline. Everyone says the first part is flat. Yeah, technically it is comparatively, but there are some nice little inclines. But your momentum, your training should take you over that. But Natick does have a few like that early on, kind of get your legs going. This being Natick still, since the 50s, there's been a Red Sox game on Patriots Day. Up until 1968, Patriots Day was April 19th, and the Boston Marathon was run on April 19th. If that was a Monday, a Tuesday, a Wednesday, a Thursday, didn't matter unless it was a Sunday. The marathon will be run throughout the week. Not until 1969 where it changed to the 3rd Monday. So now Patriots Day is always the 3rd Monday in April. But there's always been a Red Sox game, give or take, since the 50s. So you'd get updates, which is great because when the race started at noon, the game started around 10-ish, that about the time the leaders were getting to Kenmore Square, the game was getting to be about over. And you'd get another 20 or 30,000 spectators crammed into Kenmore Square, which is great. Because they've been drinking and having hot dogs for 3 hours, joining another group that's been drinking for 3 hours. It was awesome. By the time I got there as a runner, it was great. The guys were just cheering us on, and you need it at that point. Now that the starts are a little different, it's not as coordinated, but you still get thousands of extra spectators jamming Kenmore Square, which is great. And every once in a while, I'll run with somebody from out of state or a different country who has no idea what a Sox is. And I have to explain, baseball, we won this year. What it is, because you'll get updates on the chalkboard, kids with the radios, they're yelling out scores. If you're not from around here, or if you're a Yankees fan, you don't like it. But some people just don't know. But it's fun to hear that. It just also gets your mind on something else. And also the lake here, there's a great story. In the 30s, this street was a little configured differently, no guardrail, the water was a little closer. Ellison Brown, one of our great runners out of Rhode Island, who's won Boston, the story has it in the 30s, a real hot marathon. So what he did is he, in the middle of the race, dove into the water, cooled off, went back on the course, and he ended up winning. What he actually did was he sat sort of on the edge there, took his shoes off and cool off his feet. Because as you know, in the heat, your feet swell. I like both stories. So. You're tempted every once in a while. And also over here, you'll see people who are fishing all day. And every year I ran, right off the photo, there's a big guy in a canoe with his back facing us fishing. And he never turned around, ever. Any of the year, and we're like, hey, how you doing? And the guys on the guardrail would say, hey, good luck, or whatever. This guy never turned around. And I swear he just did that just to annoy us. I mean, he's like, hello, there's 30,000 people behind you. Didn't care, unless you're so focused on fishing. I never saw him get a fish, but this is Natick Center, about 10 miles. It's a little different here. The Legion, American Legion's not here. But as a runner, you would hear this flag flapping. It's huge. It was great. The spectators start to get a little closer. Some of the neighborhoods that you were seeing, the roads are really wide. But in Natick, they get a little closer, so they're really on top of you, which is nice. There's an alleyway right here, and there'd be this gentleman on a flatbed that would be singing, and you could hear him before you'd see him. And he was really good. He'd sing all like these Dean Martin and Sinatra and Neil Diamond songs, really good voice with a microphone. If you're a spectator, you have him for 3 or 4 hours. It was like a free concert. It was great. He'd wear this like, a couple of years in a row, he'd wear like this purple, I mean, I'd take my mother to Neil Diamond a number of times, and concert, and he wore like those Neil Diamond, the purple long sleeve collar shirt with the sparklies on it, you know, and showing a little chest hair and swinging. Guy was into it. It was awesome. He was just, you imagine doing that for 3 or 4 hours. Not getting paid, I assume, but he just enjoyed it. Also in Natick, I don't think this happens anymore, someone was telling me, there was an engineer or someone who would build things in the neighborhood in Natick, and he would build something and put it on a flatbed. Like this year, this is a flatbed here, and he built the wall from Fenway Park with a Coke bottle and the foul pole, and he'd have family and friends sitting on the top of the flatbed. This year, of this photo, when the Zakin Bridge was built, he built like a Zakin Bridge. Here it is, and here's a flatbed, and there's the spectators sitting on it. There's a flag up there, and it's right in between these 2 houses, and you'd never know what it was that you would see it. You know, one year he also had, I think like an Eiffel Tower type thing. He built like a dollhouse that looked like the house next door, but without a front, you know, like a dollhouse, and people were sitting on the ceiling. You know, it's just a facade, and he would have this every year. I don't think he does this anymore. But every year, this is just a couple of the years. I mean, the detail's amazing. I loved it. It's like you want to look forward to it. I mean, you're running so long, little things like that you want to look forward to. Also in Natick, this is funny, little incline going up. This is 2012, so he's not wearing his jacket when it was like 90. But the first year I ran 1990, I wear a hat. So when I'm running up this hill, you know, I'm leaning forward a little bit, and I'm on this side, and I see these, you know, bright, shiny black shoes, and this really white, fuzzy outfit, and the red pants. I look up, and it's like Santa Claus, real beard and everything. And I go, wow, I'm in trouble. This is like 11 miles, and I'm Santa Claus in April. And he goes, you boys and girls have been good this year? And we're like, I hope so. So I told my friends who had run the same year, 1990, and no one had saw him because they kind of ran on this side. You know, because this photo, we're all walking, but, you know, when I was running faster, it was all runners. You know how jam-packed, you can't even see the other side. So I said, I didn't hallucinate. The next year, 91, I brought a little camera to take a picture, not this one. So I saw him again, because I forget exactly where it is. And I'm on the sidewalk, walking up to him, I'm going to take a picture. He's got his jacket on, looks great, same guy. And then from behind him, who I didn't see initially, this little guy comes around. He's wearing green. He's got this little hat with a bell on it. He's got green shoes with another bell, and he's like this. I'm going, wow, I'm really in trouble. And he goes, would you like a photo with him? I'm going, oh, you're real, good. So he took a picture of me with Santa, and I showed my friends, and they didn't think I was crazy. But he's done this like every year. I think he missed one with his health, but it's his real beard. He does it every year, and it's just one of those things that you kind of forget as you're running, and then you kind of look up, you know, and you see him, and you go, it just, you know, helps you out, especially if it's 90 degrees out. But he was always really good, just cheering us on. Especially that year, I don't know how he did it with all that outfit on when it was so hot. Wellesley, with Wellesley College coming up. One of the things I love about Boston, like I was saying, I've run 20 other marathons in different countries and different states, is the things that Boston does. You know, I mean, a month before the marathon, I think it was last week, you have Bill Rogers and a cherry picker in the center of Boston putting up one of the marathon banners, and it's covered in the media, and the spectators there cheering them on, and you see it in the next day's paper. What other city do you get that a month before the marathon? The starting line, like I was telling you, the photo about the starting line. The police stop traffic if you want to get your picture with the starting line on marathon weekend. These little signs, no parking with a runner breaking the tape. All these neat little things that Boston has that you just don't see in other marathons. I just love these little touches, and it really helps, especially if you're from out of state. I live around here, so I love it. I can imagine someone from out of state or a different country seeing that. Now this is Mungar Hall in Wellesley, the famous Scream Tunnel. It got the name Scream Tunnel because the women would be on both sides of the runners, just cheering you on the whole time. Now they're just on one side, so it's no longer really a tunnel. But from the first marathon, 1897, there was a Harvard runner that some of the women knew. They came out and cheered him on. They've done it ever since, except for 1 year where the marathon was still April 19th on Easter break. They weren't there. But other than that, they've been there every year. You hear them before you see them. Inevitably, when I'm running, I'd have someone way before they're around the corner, hearing them saying, "Oh, is that the train coming?" I said, "Well, it could be, but it could be like 500 women cheering us." "What? Oh, this is Wellesley," and they love it because you can really hear them. It echoes. They do not stop. And what they did since social media, which is great, is if, say you live in California and your son's running, but you can't come here to cheer him on, you can contact them, Mungar Halls, where the students organize this, through social media, Facebook, Instagram, whatever you want to do, and say, "Hey, I live in California, can you put a sign?" And they'll make signs, and there's police fencing here now that you'll see. And not all, but most of those signs just from people who can't make it. There are signs from locals, they're here to do it, but a lot of those signs, the women will spend weeks, and they post this. One of them gave me a great photo to put in the book. There's all these posters on the ground. They're painting. They had the little social media going, "Okay, it's Johnny from California," and they're making all these signs, and they put them on all the fencing. It's such a great personal touch that they do. And again, they're not on this side. In '96 for the 100th, there were just so many runners, 38,000 runners. They couldn't have, because you can see the roads pretty jammed. So they started to put the fencing here. So all the women were on this side of the fencing and no one on this side, just to accommodate more runners. But this is still loud. It's just unbelievable, the support that you get. Almost a danger, because if it's like you get so pumped up, you hear it, you start to run a little, you pick up your pace, you run a little faster, then you get to the center of Wellesley and you're like, "Oh, that's not too good, that was a fast half mile, I gotta slow down." But you get all pumped up, so they just don't stop. Now here you're entering Newton. The first real hill, you'll see this on TV, the elites, they may start to separate here or start thinking about it. Because the first 13, 14 miles till you get to about Wellesley is sort of flat, little undulations, but nothing too big. Right about here, when you get to the Lower Falls, you start to go down a little bit. And that can start working on your legs. For those of us of a certain age, the Pillar House is just around here, 128.95. Okay, just to get you an idea where you are. So you're entering Newton. This is the Newton town line. And it's like a downhill. So if you haven't stretched your legs out, again, when you see the elite athletes on TV doing this, if they're stretching or surging a little bit, because you've only run a certain pace for so long, you really want to start using your other muscles for the hills that you're going to need for the hills. And this is the first real test to go before you get to 128. You're going to kind of come down this hill here. The 16-mile mark is right around the corner. Bill Squires, the original coach of the Greater Boston Track Club, he coached basically all the Americans who won Boston in the 70s and 80s. Bill Rogers, Greg Meyer, Alberto Salazar, wheelchair champion Bob Hall, all came out of the Greater Boston Track Club. And he was, started the running boom. The Greater Boston Track Club started in '73, running boom within that period of time, and some other events really culminated that. He'd bring all his top athletes up here, and he would teach them things that we all do now as runners. One of them is you run the tangent. So if there's a turn, you don't run wide like a truck. You cut that tangent. You run that tangent so you're running the least amount of distance. He'd also, imagine this on a Sunday morning, him having Bill Rogers and Salazar and Bob Hodge, Randy Thomas, all the top guys on the top of the hill, and then he'd have a tennis ball. To visualize this kind of thing for his runners, he put the tennis ball on top of the hill and just let it go. And he'd tell the runners, follow that tennis ball. The tennis ball is going to go to the least resistance, so it's going to go toward the tangent where that is. And he did this around here, because a lot of runners back then would just follow the double yellow line in the middle of the road, no matter where it was. That's what they would do. Most marathons have a blue line from the start and finish. It goes all the way to the course. We don't have that. I was asking Dave McGilvery about that, and he goes, "Paul, we have enough problems with drivers following these yellow and white lines. You're going to put a blue line in the middle?" for the rest of the year? I go, yeah, good point. So, but in the old days, the runners would run in the middle of the road, and you're just wasting energy. You're running too much. So he had a nice little example about that with the tennis ball going down here, and this is about the area he would do it. And you start to pick that out. Everyone does it now. So if you see, sometimes you see the lead runner, and behind the lead runner is like 6 or 7 other runners, like a parade. And that lead runner will go toward the corner, and everyone would like go with that runner. Well, that's what they're doing. They're going with the least resistance, blocking the wind, all these little tricks and everything. It all works. This is the hill going over 128. So the pillar house would have been like right about here. Even the overpass is like a hill. When you're driving, you don't care. But when you see this as a runner, even the wind can be different here because there's no protection underneath. Although you do have the driver's beeping and you support, which is pretty cool. But yeah, this is a big hill going over. It's about 16 and a half, 17 miles. Newton Wellesley Hospital is right around here. You have a nice flat mile that gets you to the fire station near the golf courses, so you do recover. But this is a good sized hill to go over. And you'll start to see on TV the elite athletes sort of testing each other, especially if it's a group. Like they'll run in a group in the front, and they're starting to test each other a little bit here because they know the hills are coming. So this is about a mile from that 128. So you get this nice flat area. At the fire station, you take a right, and you start the first of the Newton Hills, with a couple of hills later, it'll be Heartbreak Hill. But this is basically your first turn at about just after 17 miles. And what's interesting is you could feel an ocean breeze from here. And the Atlantic is several miles away. But you can feel it because now you're running basically toward Boston, even though you do take a turn after BC and so on. This is basically your first turn, and here's your first hill of the 3 going up in the Newton Hills area. So here is where you'll start to see the elite athletes really start to test each other. And depending how well you did on the hill, I remember one year, 1990, my first year, Giolindo Bordin from Italy won. He was about 2.5 minutes behind the leader here at the base of the hill. And because he trained on the hills in Italy, by the time he made his way to BC, he just got closer and closer and closer. He was shoulder to shoulder with Uma Ikanga at BC and just ended up winning. But if you do a good hill work training, which you should anyway in Boston, this is where you can make up some ground. Because the hills themselves aren't that bad, it's just where it is, obviously. You've just run 16, 17 miles, 18 miles, and now you're gonna do hills, because you can train on just the hills alone. It's about 5 miles from the fire station to Boston College, and that's a good training run, but the hills are fine, but you didn't run all the miles ahead of time. This is 19.1 mile. Newton City Hall is right about here at 19 miles to get your bearings. Commonwealth Avenue is right here. This is about a couple miles after the fire station photo. The statue of Johnny Kelly was actually dedicated here, about a block up, right around here, and facing the runners. But true to Boston drivers, a couple months later, a car hit it and broke its arm. So they repaired the arm, and they figured, well, we don't want to have body parts, lined up. Let's just, of the statue, let's just move it. Because if we put it back there, we're gonna have to put another arm, probably. So they put it here about 80 feet in from the course, and then facing the direction of the runners. I kind of wish it was closer, because you can't really see it when you're running the marathon here. When you're training, this is like a good starting point or finishing point for a lot of people who train, so it's a really nice landmark. But running in the marathon, you can't really see him, but it is what it is. And it's a great statue. It's Johnny Kelly on this side, winning it in 1935, holding hands with himself, running in the 90s. 1992 was the last year he ran. 91 was supposed to be the last year, but if you remember, it was really rainy and raw, and his wife was at the finish line, and when he crossed the finish line, he went to hug her, and he kind of dead weight after the cold, rainy day. He sort of hugged her, but kept going and tackled her. And he goes, I don't want my last Boston to be like this. I'll run it again in 92. And they're like, Johnny, when are you going to stop running? We got to honor you. He kept running, until he was 97 when he died. He just kept running. But this is what they did, which is a beautiful statue here. And this is at 19.1, about a mile before Heartbreak Hill. Like I said, in 35, he won. So 1936, he was favored to win. So around here, he was behind Ellison Brown. Again, one of a great marathoners out of Rhode Island. And he started to catch up to Ellison, and around Boston College, around 20 and a half miles, he caught up to Tarzan Brown, sort of tapped him on the back, kind of like, this is my race, I'll take over. Which sort of woke up Ellison, who's like, whoa, I gotta go. And then he just took off, and he ended up winning. And Johnny came in 5th. And Jerry Nason, who was a sports editor at the time for the Boston Globe, who covered all of Boston's for decades, said of that move, it broke Johnny's heart. And that's what formed into Heartbreak Hill. Johnny won it again in 1945. He came in 2nd 7 times, and he goes, half of those I should have won like this one. He goes, when you catch up to a guy, you don't do what I did. I was a cocky kid back then. You just keep going. You don't do what I did. But it's a great statue to see. And what's interesting is when they put the statue here, it's on a big cement base, granite and everything. I did a story on the statue, and they were telling me that when they lowered the statue, they put big bags of ice on the base. And they lowered the statue on the base. And the amount of time it takes to crush that ice is the amount of time they have to adjust the statue as it's sinking. And then wherever it lands, because it's the tonnage of this thing. And the son of the organizer who was doing all of this put like $10 underneath, like to do on a ship, the mast of a ship, that there's coins underneath for good luck. So he said, if you ever see the statue on its side, he goes, I need my $10 back. So fortunately, he's doing okay because he didn't need the $10 back. Here you have 21. This is the other side of Heartbreak Hill at Boston College, Gaston Hall. On your right, there's a medical tent here every mile. Bill Rogers always half joked that this is his favorite place to drop out. He's won Boston 4 times, but he dropped out his first year. 2008, 2009, he dropped out. He was running for charity, and it's around here. I mean, he's half kidding. He liked it because of the meadow tent was there, and right down the hill, the first stop of the Green Line. But what he really meant was, if you ever see on TV when you're watching the marathon, that around 20, 21, 22 mile mark, if an elite athlete steps off without it being an injury, just like steps off, they're doing it on purpose because you can run a marathon every week if you want. But competitively, the elites run one in the spring and in the fall, competitively, as a job. So, and they get paid for their placings and everything. So if an elite athlete gets to about here, and they're in like 15th, 20th place, and they're like, it's just not my day, I'm not feeling it. No injury, but it's just not my day. They'll stop here, it'll be a training run for them, and it'll save them that they could run a marathon in a few weeks, or in May, to save their spring marathon. So he was half joking when he said that, but if you ever see an elite athlete like on TV do that, and it's not an injury, that's kind of what they're doing. For us normal people, no. But for someone like that, it's their job. Now, this is the other side of Gaston Hall at Boston College when you're entering Brighton. This is Boston College still on this side, Moore Hall, which is different now. They tore that down and made it bigger. Right around the corner is a cemetery. They call it the Cemetery Mile. It's tough psychologically. The Green Line starts here. Here are the train tracks, so there's really no spectators on the left side. 22 mile markers right around here. You're really starting to feel it. It's just a tough little area to get you psychologically. You've already run like the marquee things, you know, the Wellesley Women, the Newton Hills. This is kind of like a no man's land. Also, you look to your left in the Green Line, you look through the window and you'll see runners who are dropped out wearing the silver Mylar blankets. So you kind of like don't want to see it because it's very tempting. So it's just a tough stretch to get to. And on the other side, you go down to Cleveland Circle, and then you take a left onto Beacon, which takes you right to Kenmore Square. And that's a tough area down here too because of all the tracks. Some of the wheelchair athletes, they try to go over the tracks instead of along it. And every once in a while, Jean Driscoll did this one year when she was trying to beat Louise Sauvage, who was ahead of her. And at the turn to go onto Beacon Street, she tried to cut underneath Louise Sauvage. And by doing that, her wheel then lined up with the track and just stopped her and flipped her up on the wheelchair. Again, she's an athlete, she just picked herself up, but you gotta be careful on those tracks because you know the spacing of the tracks on the ground is like that. Also, it's a place down here, they didn't have these fencing for decades. And Patty Dillon, one of our great runners out of Connecticut, she came in second place 3 years in a row in Boston. And one of the years, she's coming down Chestnut Hill Ave to get to Cleveland Circle, take a left onto Beacon. And she's in the lead, and there's spectators just love her because she's local and she's an excellent runner. And they're really close. If you ever see the old photos, I mean, it's like the Tour de France. You ever see the Tour de France footage where the cyclists are going and the spectators like get out just in time? Well, it was like that for some of these older years. So she'd be running, and the spectators, there's a couple of policemen on horses sort of keeping them back, but the best you can do. So right at that turn, she looked around to her right to see who was in second. She was in the lead. What she didn't see when she turned around was one of the police horses backed into the course, and she slammed right into the hindquarters of the horse, and just the horse is like, who cares? What was that? She kind of hit the thing and just was falling back, and there was a couple of runners. Tom Dadarian is one of them, the Greater Boston Track Club coach now, sort of caught her before she fell, like hit her head, and sort of picked her up and got her back on her feet, and she's just kind of woozy running. And I remember doing a story about it. I asked her about, I go, I know it's not like you're hitting a cement wall because it's got muscle, but what was it like? She goes, it was like hitting a cement wall. She goes, it's 2,000 pounds of horse I just slammed into. I said, what was it like? And she was saying it was something like, the Bugs Bunny cartoons where you get hit in the head and there's like stars going around. She was like, for the next half mile, I'm just like seeing stars. She probably got a concussion a little bit for the next half mile. She came in second again that year. So you go wide. But there's fencing now there, so she doesn't have to worry about that. But can you just imagine, that kind of wakes you up, especially back at that point of the race. Now at 23, you're on Beacon Street. This Beacon Street takes you right to Kenmore Square. And this is a tough stretch too, because the hills are going up and down still. In the first few years I ran it, I never put that together. And I just had a tough time because all you think of Newton Hills. Once I get to Cleveland Circle, to take a left onto Beacon, to go right to the Citgo sign, it's flat. Well, it really isn't. I remember talking to Dave McGilvey about this, and he said, we can see the skyline from Beacon. I go, no, you can't. You're 3-4 miles away. He goes, Paul, look up once in a while, because I always wore a hat. So sure enough, but I forget what this year is, a 23-mile mark, I look up, and hey, there's the skyline. You are that high on Beacon Street, that elevated, you can see the Peru and the Hancock Tower going, oh, wow. I mean, he knows his stuff. So much so that, look at how you only see like half the runners, the bodies, because you're really going up and down a lot. And you'll see on TV, the lead athletes, lead changes start in earnest here, because they will really start working on your legs. And if the lead athlete knows what this section is, it will start working on them. This also be in Brookline. I remember doing a story. The wreaths that the winners get are made in Greece as a connection to the marathon, the Olympic marathon in 1896. They're made in Greece. They're now dipped in gold. They're brought here, and there's a great ceremony either at the State House or the Greek consulate presenting it to the BAA. So I did a story about the whole story about that, and I interviewed Mike Dukakis. If all of you remember from his presidential campaign, he was a proud Greek American. So I'm thinking, well, he's Greek, this is great, I can talk to him. He works at Northeastern. So he gave me some great stories about the wreath, but he lived in Brookline, and he ran Boston in high school, and did, I think, like 3.5 hours, did really well. And he was telling me a story around here saying that his future wife, Kitty, at the time wasn't his wife, said that, I was asking him about it, and he goes, yeah, Kitty said she gave me water around here, because there was no water stations. I said, wow, that'd be really neat. Your future wife gave you water. I go, wow, that's kind of neat. He goes, I don't remember that. I said, you don't? He goes, but Paul, if Kitty says she gave me water, she gave me water. I said, oh, okay. He goes, happy marriage. She gave me water. I go, all right, that's good point. You're in Boston proper, in the Boston Marathon, for about 1.5 miles. And the only sign that tells you you're in Boston is this one. All those previous photos I showed you, at the big silver saying entering Wellesley, entering Natick. Well, there is no big silver unless they just put it up. This says entering Boston. This is about 3/4 tenths of a mile before the Pike, before you get the signal sign, give you bearings. This Boston line is basically parallel to you. St. Mary's is what is facing you. So even as a runner, you don't see that unless you turn to your right and look at it. This is the city line. Which, interestingly, in 1899, the leader, Lawrence Bergoli, tripped over cobblestones and landed and scraped his knees. He ended up winning, but his welcome to Boston was a face plant on the street. There's no more cobblestones there, but that's it. Every year I would miss seeing it. I had to drive to get this photo for the book because as a runner, by the time you get to the church or the Pike, it's behind you, because you'd never see it. But this is it. That's the only thing that tells you you're in Boston. And this is the Mass Pike. Look how much that goes over the Mass Pike. This is about 3/10 of a mile from the entering Boston sign. So you're running here. Here's a Citgo sign. that it's no joke that when runners say it never gets closer, when you first see it on Beacon Street a mile or two away, it's like this big, and it just stays this big until about here, and then it becomes there. You know, it's like water miles. If you're on the water, the miles, nautical miles, objects seem closer or farther. This thing never gets any closer. It's like it's a torture for runners until you're right here. Then it's like, there it is. And once you see that, you have a mile to go. But here's the overhead going over the Mass Pike. And I was telling someone here whose husband ran this in the 50s, that this bridge here, when you're going up Beacon Street to get to Kenmore Square, this overpass used to be a little crooked, like on an angle. So you'd have to kind of go up a little bit. So in the 50s, the city straightened it out, as it is now. So it's a good flow right into Kenmore Square. But in the 50s, the BAA started to notice a lot of the runners had these much better times for like a year or two. And they couldn't figure it out until they finally dawned on them that the city straightened out the course, and thereby shortening the course. Not too much, maybe 100 yards or so, but enough that as a runner you could feel it. So they remeasure the course, and they remeasure it and pay attention to construction much better now. But back in the 50s, and it wasn't done out of malice, the city just didn't think of, you know, the BA didn't think of it when they fixed the bridge. But it's the course, so you gotta keep an eye on it. And this is Kenmore Square, 1 mile to go. It's usually painted right about here, so it's 1 mile to go. I took this for the 100th. That's why Ronald McDonald was cheering us on from the top. Rosie Ruiz's little entranceway here on the bus station, train station. This is a little different here. I think there's an overhang now for the buses, so Kenmore Square looks a little bit different. But I tell runners, unless you have a broken leg or something, no matter how bad you feel, the spectators are going to carry you in this last mile. The cheering is just going to be unbelievable. And especially now, this little overhang, this little bridge here is where it says Boston Strong now. Just like you always see those photos. You may not know where it is. It's right here, about 3/4 of a mile to the finish line at the Hancock Tower. But yeah, right here, the cheers, because these guys, again, have been here for hours, going, just platooning in and out of the bars. It's awesome. And coming from Fenway, the train is here, the bus here, so this is like where a lot of people really start to congregate to cheer you on. It's excellent. You take a right, the old right on Hereford, left on Boylston. This is the left on Boylston, right in front of the Heinz Convention Center where the expo is. You pick up your number, and then this is the finish line stretch. There's a finish line here, 26-mile mark is right about here. And this is like, I tell runners, it's like a love-hate relationship with this street, because the cheering is just awesome. It bounces off the buildings, it's so loud, it echoes, it's amazing. You want to soak it in, because like I said, you've changed your life for months, for a year. You know, like I said, you've annoyed your family, you forgot to pick them up, you've just done everything. You want to soak this up so long, and it's very emotional. You're very emotional. However, you've just run 26 miles and you kind of want to stop running. So this is like, well, I want this to last, but boy, I really want to stop running. I want my medal, but it's just a weird stretch. So you'll see runners kind of like slowing up or going, unless you're an elite athlete, you take off. Now to set up the next photo, from 1965 to 1985, like I said, the starting line was on Hayden Row Street that runs perpendicular to Main. The finish line was on Ring Road, which is right about here, parallel to Boylston. So you would come up you take a left on Boylston, and around here you'd go off Boylston here, and you'd finish here. Boylston Street is right here. This is the Prudential Center. This is taken from the 60s. So all the finishes from 1965 to 85 was on what's called Ring Road, which was parallel to Boylston. Going to give you an indication. There is a Ring Road on the other side of the building that connects you to where the Westin is. This was like an extension of Ring Road. Now this is now cement patio. You just walk on it. The Prudential here, there's shopping and everything. But for those 20 years, like all those, like I said, the Bill Rogers, the Bobby Gibb, Joan Benoit Samuelson, wheelchair athlete Bob Hall was here. So all those photos that you see, this isn't Boylston Street, this is Ring Road. It's a great photo the city gave me to use for the book. And the staging's right here, so if you have to run fast, you better hop over the stage. That's a little close, especially for a long stretch. If you're first and second, you really want to run fast. So now what you do is you just continue on Boylston. This was taken, I think I took this 2 years ago. So you continue on Boylston, you no longer, like I was saying, you no longer go there. In 1985, when Boston was looking around for sponsorships, they signed a deal with John Hancock, which is ending this year, ironically. And so for the 1986 race, the first year of sponsorship and money, John Hancock, basically gave them a check for $10 million for 10 years and said, don't cash it until you move the starting line from in front of our competitor, the Prudential, closer to us, the Hancock Tower. So the BAA, thought about it for like 2 seconds and go, okay. So that's why in '85, that's the last year it was on Ring Road. From '86 on, it's where it is basically now, in front of or closer to the Hancock Tower. That's why it ended in '85 on Ring Road. So with the finish line here in front of the bleachers, with the church and the towers like right here on the edge. This is where you see all Channel 4, Channel 5, Channel 7 for decades. They all battle each other, which is kind of funny because when you see it on TV, here are the commentators from the TV. They're watching monitors like we are. It's not until the elite athletes turn onto Boylston that they finally turn around and can see the runners. So they're actually watching it just like we are, but they get more information. And the actual finish line itself is interesting. Dave McGilvey always jokes that he's the only marathon he knows of that paints the finish line after the race. Because he doesn't paint it. It's not painted for the race. It's painted for tourists to take photos throughout the year. They put this nice latex covering. Most marathons do this now. And it's backwards because the runners come from this area. Photographers are here. So when the photographers take a picture of you finishing, you can read the word finish. But as you approach it, it's upside down as a runner. But you don't care. As a runner, you just want to finish. And so they do paint this on, like usually Wednesday or Thursday afterwards. I did a story on that once of when they did that. And it's great. They shut down Boylston Street. I was able to park right on Boylston. It was awesome. I took a picture of my parking space. Because when can you just drive onto Boylston and park, right? With no traffic. And they paint it in sections if it's raining. Usually Wednesday or Thursday of that week. I'll end with this, give you a moment to look at. This is the Boylston Street stretch. Here is the firehouse of Hereford Street, and this is the Heinz Convention Center, the Expo Center, right here. Here's a portion of Ring Road. It's now just a sidewalk. Okay, so the runners would, after you come off on Hereford Street at the fire station, you'd hook here on Boylston, and then from 65 to 85, you jump on here, finish right about here or so, which is in front of the Prudential building, okay? But from 86 on, you just finish, you keep going down Boylston Street and you finish right here. This is the Boston Public Library. As I was saying, when your husband ran in the 50s, back then, this is Boylston Street, Newbury, Comm Ave. You'd come down Comm Ave in the old days, you'd take a turn onto Exeter Street, and the finish line was about here, behind the Boston Public Library. The first 2 years, 1897, 1898, around here is where Irvington Street was, and there was a track oval, and that's where it finished. It's no longer there now. And then the BEA Clubhouse was built somewhere around here behind the library. So this is the Lenox Hotel. So those old black and white photos that you see Johnny Kelly and all those guys finish, they're actually coming down Exeter Street. So the Lenox Hotel is on the top left of the photo, kind of give you a bearing of those photos. And the finish line would be around here. That's where he finished, somewhere around here. But then that changed, obviously, when it changed to this. You no longer go down Comm Ave, you come down Boylston Street, and you finish here. And this is the last year of John Hancock sponsorship. Bank of America, they just announced as the new sponsor. I assume it's going to be the same. I don't think they're going to change, I can't speak for them, but I assume that'll be the same spot. But there's a nice overview of what the end looks like. So if anyone has any questions of what I've discussed or didn't discuss or had shown you or anything like that, anyone have any questions? Well, I'll be here. Yeah.
I just have one question.
Sure.
I thought that for the 100, there were 45,000 runners. And you said
38,000.
38?
Yeah, 38,000. And they had it in waves too. It was spread from, they used a side street. So from the starting line to the first side street, those runners on Main Street left. Then the side street full of runners came off, and then they went. And then the next portion of Main Street from between the side streets went. And then the side, so logistically kind of was like a wave of sections, yeah. It didn't take that long, actually. I think within 20 minutes, everyone was through. They were thinking like an hour because they never had 38,000 people. Other marathons do, but our streets are so narrow. It's tough, and it went pretty smoothly for the 100th. Yeah, I didn't have a problem. Yeah.
The field
was always so much smaller back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. But then I think there was a transition when someone came up with a great idea to run for charity. And that's when we had this explosion.
Yeah, that was one of them, yeah.
38,000. I mean, when I ran it for 6,000, it was a huge crowd.
Yeah, what year was that?
Yeah, 3,000. That was back in the 70s.
70s, yeah.
Yeah.
1968, 1969 was the first year there were 1,000 runners. Prior to that, it was just in the hundreds. Then it was just a race. I was telling somebody earlier, there was only a few marathons in the country. If you think about it, the first marathon, other than the myth of Philippides, the first marathon was in April 1896 in Greece, basically the qualifier for the Olympic marathon. Second marathon was the 1896 Modern Olympic Games marathon. Third marathon was one in New York that went from Stanford to Columbus Circle, only lasted 1 year. That was in the fall of before Boston's. The fourth marathon was ours, 1897 in April, was the Boston Marathon. That was it. And for decades, there was Yonkers in New York, Culver City in California, maybe a couple of others, but they were used for the United States team to qualify to run the marathon in the Olympics. There was when you ran, there really wasn't that many in the 60s. In the 70s, you started to get Chicago, New York, Honolulu. Those started to come up. When the running boom started, with Frank Shorter winning gold in 72, Title IX in 72, Jim Fixx's book about running, the aerobics book, Dr. Cooper, all that, and then Bill Rogers winning Boston in 75, here's a local guy. Within about a 3-4 year span, all these things kind of came together that said, hey, running is pretty good. Let's go out and run. Whether you're gonna run a race or just run. Because prior to that, no one was really running, you know. So that really got everything together. So then, you know, runners started to enjoy it. Boston was a little late to the game for sponsorships because we were losing the elite athletes going to Chicago and New York so that would give them prize money. You know, it took us a little long to do that until 1986. But then you did charity runners in addition to that. But the big thing was the amateur runner. Prior to that was just the runners that when you went into a race, there was only 100 runners. Of those 100, you know, a quarter of them could win. It came out of that. Now with most marathons, you know, the 0.00% could win. You know, out of the top 30 out of 30,000 runners is where the win is going to come from. But back then, you know, there wasn't that much. But when the aerobic benefits came out and running just to be casual and amateur, that's when you started getting a lot of extra running. Like I said, 1969 was the first, 68 or 69 was the first year Boston had 1,000 runners. It was like 1,008. Prior to that, those decades from 1897 on was just hundreds, you know, and in the teens, real early. So yeah, it's interesting how it just blossomed like that. And then when you introduced prize money in 86, another big thing was the standards in 1970, which sort of, you know, went against what, you know, prior to 1970, the BEA and like Coach Squires would be telling me that when I wrote his book, he was telling me, they started seeing runners who would just run a portion of the race for a joke, or they'd have a Superman outfit on or something. They wanted to weed those guys out and keep this a race. So they introduced standards, qualifying standards in 1970 in Boston. I think at the time you had to run a marathon under 4 hours or a 20-miler under 3.5, something like that, and have some sort of verification. And that got you in. Well, the following year, the numbers jumped up because everyone's like, oh, this is like, I gotta do this now. It's like it brought attention to it. It kind of worked against what they really wanted to do. More runners came. And then it became a goal. And then it became, you're doing other marathons to qualify for this. And that just snowballed to what it is now. And it's a good thing. I mean, to me, a race is, you know, separated to within the same race, the winners, the age group runners, the amateur runners, and charity. That's a marathon, that's a race. And Meb Keflezighi's win in 2014 is no way diminished from charity runners in the back and vice versa. To me, it's all the same. They're all the same because one doesn't really affect the other, as far as I'm concerned. But it did happen like that. It was steps. No one really planned it. But so it's become what it is now. Yeah, a lot of races do that too, not just ours, which is neat. Falmouth did it too, and especially the wheelchair. You know, with Bob Hall introducing wheelchairs in 1975. He was the first one out of Belmont. You just maybe think of that, to add another division of competitors in the race. Prior to 75, there was no wheelchair athletes at all in marathons. And Bob Hall, who was a student of Bill Squires at Boston State College, and he was an athlete, asked, I'd like to do the Boston Marathon. So coach was like, all right, we'll give you a training program. Talked to Will Clone, to BAA, and they said, well, we don't have one. All right, if he can finish, I'm simplifying, if he can finish under 3 hours, he'll be an official entrant, official finisher. So they trained, and Bob Hall in 1975 finished Boston in 2 hours and 58 minutes, became the first official finisher and entrant of a marathon, Boston being the first. And from that point on, everything you see started with him, with Bob Hall out of Belmont. He started. He actually made chairs, called Falmouth one year, a couple years later, said, hey, can I do the race? Yeah, come on over. Just, it's what it is now because of that one man. So all those things added, yeah. So it's a neat little collection of everything. Any other questions or anything? Well, I'll be here afterwards, like I say, if you want to tell stories or have any questions you think of. And again, if you buy any of the books, I can sign them for you for a gift for someone who you know is running. Christmas is around the corner, as you saw Santa, so I'll be here. But thanks again, I appreciate you coming.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.